Hello and welcome to part 3 of a new Half-Life modding tutorial series. In this tutorial, we'll make our first map for our Half-Life mod using a Valve Hammer editor, which we set up in part 2. Please go and watch the first 2 parts if you haven't already, and at the end of this video I'll be doing a little FAQ to solve some common problems that you may run into. So, to begin, you must completely exit Steam, and once you've exited Steam, we can launch it again, but as an administrator. If you don't run it as an administrator, you may have issues loading your map directly from Hammer. Okay, so now Steam is restarted, we can go ahead and launch the Half-Life SDK. So if we go to our Tools library and find your Half-Life SDK, double click it to run it, and here's Valve Hammer Editor. So, to begin our first map, now that we've configured everything as we saw in part 2, you can click on File, and click on New. The first time you create a new map, you should be presented with 4 different views. Each of these views represent a different perspective of your map. So the top left view is the camera view, and that will show you the 3D game world as it would appear in game, without any lighting though, of course. The top right view is your top-down perspective, so the XY axes. Besides the top view and the camera view, we also have, of course, these 2 side views. We've got the front, which is YZ axes, and the side, which is the X and Z axes. To be honest with you, you only really need to use one of the sides at a time, but it's useful to have both front and side so you can work out where things are more easily. So we can navigate each of these views using the arrow keys on the keyboard. And you can also zoom in and out with the scroll wheel, fairly self-explanatory. If you zoom in and out with the scroll wheel on the camera view, you don't really zoom so much as move around the world. But you can also use, if you hit Z while you're in the camera view, you'll basically no clip around, so you can use WASD to move your camera around the world. And you can see here, we've got nothing here except these 3 lines, sorry. And these 3 lines represent the center of your world and each axis in the 3D space. So, as we've got nothing there at the moment, I'm going to take you through some of the tools and stuff now, and we'll get creating. So, on the left hand side of Hammer, we have these tools here. Now, at the moment I've selected the selection tool, and that's useful for highlighting big areas and lots of different objects at once, and see it appears in the camera view as well. On the right hand side of the Hammer window, we can select different textures. If you click on Browse, you can see we've got all our different textures from our WAD files which I've loaded up, and those obviously make the game world much more interesting. We also have viz groups. You can group together different 3D shapes, and there's also stuff to do with some other tools down here, which I'll go into in a little while. Before we make anything, we'll have to make sure that we click on the camera button in the top left corner of the camera view. Make sure you click that, and then click on 3D textured. It's quite important you do that, because otherwise you'll probably just get a blank camera view. You won't get any textures appearing. So to begin creating our first shape in Hammer, we can begin by using the block tool. So if you click on the kind of little grey cube here, that is the block tool, and it works in a similar way to the selection tool. So you kind of click and drag over an area you want, and you can see here it's made a little block. And if you look in the side and front view, if I make that a bit more of an odd shape, like so, let's make it lengthways, that's right. Okay, so let's say that's where our 3D shape is going to appear. At the moment it's just a wireframe, so I haven't actually created it, which is just the place it'll be going in. So once you've highlighted an area, you can quite easily right click on the block area, and you can click on Create Object, and that will create this 3D shape with lots of pink and black lambda signs on it. So that's your very first brush. We call 3D shapes in Hammer brushes. I'm not entirely sure why. If anyone does know, why, it'd be interesting to know, and let me know in the comments. But we call them brushes and hammer 3D shapes, and use the block tool to create these 3D shapes. Now, remember you can move around the camera view by pressing Z once, and then just using WSAD and then press Z again to exit the camera view. You can also select, so if you've got a selection tool, you can select it in the grid views, the shapes, or you can select it in the camera view as well. Next, I reckon we should add a texture to this because it looks a bit naff. So I'm going to create, I'm going to try and find a good floor texture. I think this will make a good floor for our level. So if we click on Browse over on the right of Hammer window, and you can see down here we've got a little filter box, and you can just type FL, and that will bring up all the textures with FL in the name, which is typically floor textures. So if you have a look through, tick your pick, whatever floor texture you prefer. I reckon I'm going to go with, I'll go with this metal kind of tunnel floor. Now, in order to apply the texture, we have to select our brush that we want to apply, and then over here on the left you can see this kind of bricky textured cube here called Apply Current Texture, and click on that, and there we go. Now you can see it's been applied. If we click off anywhere away from this brush, so we deselect it, we can see now our texture has been applied. It looks all wonderful, so that's all good. So now we've got our floor for our level. So the next step is to add some walls. So again, same process. We just click on the block tool. But before we actually create our walls, it'd be much easier if we selected the texture first and then the wall texture is already applied for us. So that'll save a bit of time in the long run. So click on Browse again for your texture browser and type in wall in the filter, and find a wall you'd like. So again, just find any old wall would do. I don't know, let's try this concrete wall. It's going to look very industrial. If we create a wall along the top end first, you can see, you can actually see in the camera view when you create any brush in one of the grid views, its position in the other views will usually be centered, so it'll be near the center of those views. So that means that it won't be in the right position in terms of height and stuff usually, so you just need to shift it up or whatever. So you can see here this is where our block area, where our brush will be placed. Make it a bit taller. At this point I think as well, I think I like thinner walls really. That's a very chunky, the square size on the grid is very, very big. So if we use the square bracket key, so you can use the left square bracket key to make the grid square smaller. And you can see down here, see how many units big a square is. So if we go all the way down to 1 and zoom in, you can see one of those squares is what we call 1 unit. So if you ever want to do really precise brushwork, or if you want to actually kind of measure up, create scale versions of it, like buildings from reality or anything, and it's quite useful to use units. Okay, so make it a bit bigger. We don't need squares that small, so I think 32 size should be big enough. And then of course we can just click on these little squares to resize our shape. And I think that seems okay. Maybe make it a couple more squares taller. Right click, create object. You can also, rather than right clicking, I'll demonstrate on another wall now. If we create another wall on this side of our room, and remember we'll probably need to drag it up on the side views. If you create that there, if you just hit enter in one of the grid views while you're mousing the grid view, it should create it for you like that. So you don't even need to right click and click create object. So we have a couple of walls in our level now. Let's complete the other walls. The easiest way and the quickest way to do this is just copy and paste, which thankfully Hammer supports. So you can select this wall and we'll copy and paste it onto the other side so we can have another wall. So if we can do Control C for copy, or you can just right click and say copy. And then you can actually do there's a couple of ways to paste in Hammer. One of them's just, Control V regular. And of course that places it relatively central in your grid views. But Control Z to undo, by the way. But there's another way of pasting as well, which is quite useful. You can right-click and click on Paste Special, and then it kind of brings up this. If you just click OK, and you'll notice that we've got this new brush had been created in the original spot of this brush. So you don't have to reposition it or anything in the other side views. You just had to shift it around in the top view, which is quite useful sometimes, especially when you're copying very complex brushes. So again, we can repeat the process for the other wall. So Control C, I'll just do Control V this time and just move it in that view and in that view, and there we go. So we got our walls, no gaps to avoid. I should mention all this black space around our map is called the void, and you want to keep everything in your map contained, so none of it's accessible to the void. I'll talk about that a bit later in the FAQ. At this point, I'm getting paranoid, so I'm gonna click on File, Save As, and we should probably save a map fairly regularly, just in case we do have any crashes or anything. And you can see I'm already in the map folder I created in the previous tutorial. It doesn't really matter where this map folder is, you can save it anywhere, as long as somewhere accessible. So I'm going to call this one First Map Tutorial. Should always make sure it's saved as hammer/worldcraftmaps.rmf, not .map. And I'm going to hit save. Anyway, so that just saves our Hammer editor file. You can't run it in Half-Life or anything yet. It's just an easy access thing for Hammer to use. So now we've saved our map and we've got these 4 walls and the floor, we can start adding a ceiling to our little room. So again, we can use copy and paste, quite useful. So Control C, Control V, let's reposition it in all the views. And there we go, we got our enclosed boxy room. If we go inside and no clip through the walls, you can see the center of our map is here. That's all good. Probably just change the texture on the ceiling. If we type in seal, and I don't know, find a standard concrete ceiling and apply. Now we have our room. We can start adding our player spawn point. In any game you play or anything, there's always, as well as obviously you have these 3D shapes and stuff to block out your world, you of course have stuff you can interact with, like doors, buttons, other non-player characters, NPCs, and all that sort of thing. And Half-Life at the very least, and quite a lot of other games as well, call those interactive elements entities. So the main entity we need for our map is of course the player spawn point, otherwise the map won't work properly, we won't be able to explore it. So if you see this little kind of game counter type button here, and it says entity tool, click on that, and you'll notice on the right here of the window that the objects box says info_player_start, and you might notice if we go in tools and options, from our game configurations in the last tutorial, that is our default point entity class, and the reason that's popped up is because it's the default, so it's the first one that appears. So if we click on the box, you can also have a look through the other different entities like lights and things like that, but we'll use info player start because that is the player spawn point, so that's good, that's what we need. I'm going to place the player spawn point at this end, and the easiest way to place an entity in your map is to go in your camera view with the entity tool selected and then just click somewhere in your map, and there we go. If you have a look in the side view, however, you can see the the player spawn point is actually sticking through the floor, which is not good, as our player would get stuck if we left it like that. So just reposition it, kind of attempt to resize it, which will just move it And yeah, that's fine. If there's a little bit of gap between this and the floor, that's perfect. We don't want it to be touching the floor or going through the floor really, because we can have issues where the player gets stuck if we do that. And there we go. Now we're ready to compile our map so we can test it in Half-Life. If you recall, I mentioned in I think part 2 that when we save our map file, we of course just save it as an RMF, which is just an editor, a Hammer editor file. But in order for it to work in Half-Life our map, we need to export it or compile it as a BSP format file. And to do that, once we've saved our map in an RMF format, we can, you see this little kind of these cog icon up here, this button here, says run map. Click on that and this window should appear. Because we don't have any lights, we can disable RAD, so we can say no for that. Leave everything else as it is. And then once we've done that, we can click OK to compile the map. Now, this process will take a moment before it automatically launches Half-Life. And if you have any issues at this point, please see the FAQ at the end of the video. So now click OK, and can see this little window pop up. And you can see each executable is being run to process our map and turn it into a BSP file. So now it'll run in Half-Life. Okay, so here we are in our map. Walk around, it's all working. We're now gonna move on, and I'm gonna introduce you to solid entities, so you can make brushes themselves interactive. So we can make a door or a button or whatever. So I'll introduce those to you back in Hammer. Okay, so here we are back in Hammer, and I think I'm gonna split this whole room in two and add a little doorway between. So to begin, we're just gonna duplicate our wall with our Control C, Control V, and I'm going to place it in the middle there. I'll upscale the grid a bit with the square bracket keys, remember. You can use the left one to make it smaller, the right one to make the grid squares bigger. I'm going to resize this. That should do on that side. Control C, Control V. Move that over there, reposition it in the side view. And then I'm going to do Control C, Control V again. Reposition it, resize it, and resize it some more, but on the side view this time. And there's my doorway. So now to add our door, I'm going to find the door texture, so type DR to bring up all the doors, and scroll up to the top. I'm going to use this one, I think. Select the texture you want, and then zoom in on the top view, make the grid smaller so you can actually fit the door in. And I'm going to highlight with the block tool selected an area where I want my door, and move it about on the side view, and resize it, and then hit enter, and there's my door. However, you might notice the texture is a bit skew-if, so we need to fix that. So if you select the door and then click on this multicoloured cube right here, that'll bring up the texture manipulator window. I'll just go through quickly all of these different settings. So we've got scale. Scale stretches it out or compresses the texture. By the way, I'll just hide the mask and click on that and it will hide the red highlight. But you can see clearly it stretches it or compresses it. If it goes negative, it just flips it around the other way, so it's useful for reversing a texture if you so wish. I'm going to leave mine at 1. That's fine. Shift, exactly the same kind of principle, except it just, rather than stretching it on the x-axis, it actually moves the whole texture. For y-axis, exactly the same sort of thing for scale. And exactly the same sort of thing for shifting, it just repositions it. So, that's scale and shift. Scale stretches, shift repositions. Then down here we've got rotation, again self-explanatory, it rotates for texture in degrees. And we also have the justify buttons. Now the justify buttons basically make use of the scale and shift properties. But if you click on left, for instance, when it'll move the texture left, if you move it right, I'll move it right. I'll just downscale this so you can see better. If I move it right, it moves right. If I click left, it moves left. Bottom, it moves to bottom. T, it moves to the top. and then C is for center, so it centers the texture, and fit does what it says on the tin. It fits the whole texture to the brush you're working on. Treat is 1 if you have multiple faces selected, like we do here, or for instance if you let's bring up my mouse so you can see you can do select a face by clicking on it, but you can also hold down Control and select other faces to select multiple faces, and then I don't know, rotate them all at once or whatever if you so wish, or shift them or whatever. I'm going to reselect the door, and if we have a look, if we no clip into these walls, you can see the side of the door and the top of the door and so on is actually just a squished version of the normal door texture, because we tried to fit the texture onto all the different faces and it fits onto each individual face. So in the case of the side and the top and the bottom, then obviously it's been squeezed. What I'm gonna do is come out here and hold down Control and select the face, front and back face of your door. Hold on Control, click, and then what we have left is we've selected the other 4 faces, so on the top, bottom, sides of your door. And I'm going to change that texture because I don't really want a squished door texture on it. And I'm going to find a texture I like. Actually, one of these seem to be pretty good. I'll just use that one. Click on Apply, and I'll set the scale to 1 and 1 for the X and Y, just so it's not stretched out and doesn't look weird. And you can see here we've got a decent texture on the sides of the door. Now, we've got our door. Before I get into turning it into an entity, I'm just going to carve a slot out with this wall here. So I'm going to introduce you to the clipping tool to do this. If you move our door into the wall like that, whenever the door moves, as a sliding door anyway, it will move along its whole length and then stop in the wall or wherever it's moving to. And you can see here, if I go along here, you can see whenever I move the camera view around, this texture looks disgusting because it kind of tries to blend into the texture of the wall, and it just doesn't really work. So I'm going to cut out a slot so that doesn't happen inside the wall. So my door's in there, I can kind of get a gist of how big the slot should be. If you select the wall that we want to do, and we're going to use the clipping tool, so click on this button down here. And the clipping tool basically lets you draw a line, and anything on the red dotted side of a line is deleted when you hit enter, and anything on the white side is kept. So if I hit enter now, you can see part of the brush is deleted. Just undo that because I don't want to actually delete the whole wall. I just want to split it in half. So I can hold down Shift and then press X, and that will actually switch which side is going to be deleted. But I can also do that once again, and you can see both sides are now white, and what that means is I can hit enter, and if I come here and just select one of the brushes, you can see they're both split into two separate parts now. So I can just work on this chunk of wall here rather than the whole thing. And again, you can use the clipping tool on either axis. So for instance, I can do the same thing. The top bit there, that one. Then we just have this little chunk down here, which is the one I want to carve a slot out of. So I'm going to draw a line down there for one side, hit enter. Now I've got 2 separate brushes there. And now with this one I can just resize it, and I have a little slot. So if I move my door back out, if I move it out of the way completely, you can see now I've got a little slot in here where my door will be recessed. And I don't know if you noticed, but when the door is inside the recess, there is of course no weird texture clashing going on because it's not the door face isn't meeting any face on the wall. So put the door back in its normal position when it's closed, and now we've done all the brushwork we need to do, we can turn this door into an actual entity that moves. So to do that, you can select the door, and you can either click this button here called to entity, or you can right click the door and click on tie to entity. And this brings up the object properties. At the moment this entity is set to func wall. We don't want to have a wall, we want a door, so you click on the drop down list and then scroll up until you find func door. And now I'm going to take you briefly through these various different properties. So all entities generally have a similar list of properties. Probably the most common ones are name, render effects, effects amount, target is another common one. And all these attributes or properties allow you to change specific things about the entity itself. So for instance, in the case of a door, you can change how fast it opens or closes. So when it's on 100 by default, if you put it to 0, it'll just go to its default value, which is 100. If you put it on 1, I imagine it will just move really slowly. 50 is moderately fast, moderately slow. I'm just going to leave it on 100 for now because that's a fairly decent speed for a sliding door. What you can do with a name is if you name, for instance, this door, door 1, and actually I'm going to show you how to create a button. So if we have a little button for our door, and we just pop that on the wall next to the door, just quickly find the button texture. Yeah, that'll do. Create the object, select it, fit it, and I'm just going to deselect those and put that texture on the sides. That's fine. Right, now we have a button for our door. I'll just really quickly tie it to an entity. Right click, tie to entity. Window pops up. I'm going to turn this into a func button. And you can see here we've got name and target and stuff. We've got some of the common things you saw in func door. I'm not going to bother setting a name for the button, but I'm going to set the target to door 1, which happens to be the name of the door. So because the door's name is door 1 and the target of the button is door 1, and whenever this button is pressed, basically the door will open. I'm just going to change the settings on the door a bit more, so make sure you select the door. We can set the move sound, so whenever the door moves, set it to a servo sound. Whenever it stops, make it a light air brake or chunk or whatever. Delay before closed. I'm going to make this a toggle door, so you can toggle it open or close with a button. So I'm going to set it to -1. So what will happen with -1 is when the door is opened or closed, then it will stay open or stay closed until it's triggered again. And to make sure that this actually works, you can go into the flags of the door and check for toggle flag, and that will ensure that the door can be toggled open or shut. Lip just specifies how much of a door actually opens, so it may not open all the way if you set the lip anything higher than 0. Damage inflicted when blocked. If a player gets in the way, he'll get damaged. And that's all the important stuff we need to do, I reckon, for this door. Now if we go on to the button entity and click on flags, we also need to make this a toggle. I'm going to set this don't move. I don't want any sparks, I don't really want the touch to activate it, so that's all fine. And let's see, target is door 1, that's what we want. Speed doesn't matter because it's not moving, because we toggled the don't move flag. You can set a sound for it. So I make a keycard sound. Delay before reset. Just set that to 0. Doesn't really matter because the button doesn't move. Yeah, that seems okay. So you can close that, and I'll just really quickly open up the door properties again because I almost forgot. You see this angle here. From the top-down perspective, when you have this door selected, you can see that the angle is kind of pointing off to the right. And at the moment, that means when the door opens, it's going to do that. It's just going to shift in that direction like that, and we don't want that. We want it to move into our slot, so we want it to move kind of 90 degrees to the right. So that's 270 degrees all the way around the circle. And now if we close that, and remember to save regularly, we should have a working button and door. I'm going to lower the button a bit so it's a bit more accessible to a player. Something like that. I'm going to also copy it to the other side And also, I should mention this now, quite a useful part of brush manipulation. You can click on any selected entity, any selected brush again, and you can see that these 4 little circles pop up. And if you hold down Shift and click on one of the circles and drag it around, you can actually rotate the brush, so you can see you can rotate it. So it's just like manipulating images in Paint, really. And if you click it again, you can do a vertex manipulation, which you can see does this weird funky thing, which kind of makes it into a rhombus or whatever the 3D equivalent is. That's quite useful for making terrain and stuff like that. Just gonna reposition the textures on this. There we go. And because this is a perfect copy, both buttons are just gonna target the door. The properties are copied over and then they're copied, so that's fine. We now have a door and have a button on both sides, so we can open and close the door as we wish. So I'm going to go ahead and compile this, and if we click on compile, run RAD, no, because we don't have any lighting still, and can click OK with all the default settings, and I'll see you up ahead. Okay, so here we are in our lovely map, which is a lot more interesting now because we've suddenly got this door. So you can see here we've got a button. If we use it, the door opens. And we can go through, use the other button, door closes. Open it again, door opens, door closes. Door opens, door closes. I have to apologise, I haven't got any sound because my screen recorder is being a bit dodgy, but yours should have the Half-Life sounds as the door opens and closes. Yeah, so that's that. Shouldn't open when you walk into it because the button targets it and it's on -1. So yeah, thanks for watching this tutorial. I'm now going to go into an FAQ section, which will go into some of the common issues that you might have making your first map. Alright, it's FAQ time. So I'm just going to go over the top 5 issues and solutions you might come across in your first map. These are kind of from experience and people commenting under my videos and stuff over the last few years, so here we go. Number 1. Hammer is only showing me one view when my map is loaded. Okay, well, it's usually a fairly simple fix. If we click on View in Hammer, and then you click on Auto Size 4 Views, and you get all 4 of your views auto-sized back onto the screen. If that doesn't work, try reinstalling Half-Life SDK. Issue number 2. Half-Life doesn't launch when I compile my map. So this is probably because you either made a mistake configuring Hammer in part 2, or you need administrator permission to get Half-Life to run your map for you. Try closing Hammer and exiting Steam, then launch Steam as an administrator. If that doesn't work, make sure you followed part 1 and part 2 correctly. Number 3. Half-Life runs, but my map doesn't load. I get the console error, map change failed, my map, example, whatever your map name is, not found on server. There are a couple of reasons this may happen. One is that your map may be saved with spaces in the name. This is a big no-no as Half-Life can't launch files with spaces in the names. The other possible reason is that an error occurred while you were compiling, so a BSP file never got created. If you did get an error while you're compiling, do make sure that you followed part 2 and part 1 correctly, and if the error still persists and you're sure you've got that all correct, just comment below and I'll try and resolve it. Okay, issue number 4. My map loads, but I can't turn around the full 360 degrees with my mouse. What's going on? Well, sometimes Half-Life won't use your mouse correctly. To fix it, you could just open up the options menu, navigate to the mouse tab and toggle the raw mouse input box. Hit apply and close the options, then return to the game. If that doesn't work immediately, try recompiling and then relaunching your map. And final issue number 5. I get a leak error when I compile my map. Now, a leak occurs when an entity is visible to the void. So by the void I mean the empty space outside your map, so all this blackness out here, that is the void. And then your actual map is all contained, or should be contained, not necessarily within a single room, but you know, within corridors or within the skybox or whatever. All your entities should be within some kind of box or system, so that they're not exposed to the void. An issue will appear if you have, say, this wall. If we resized it wrong and we had this big gaping gap like that, that would be a massive issue. It's a hole through to the void. That would break your map, and you'd get a leak error. Your map will probably still work. It just means stuff like lighting or certain entities won't work. They won't behave properly. And again, a leak could happen anywhere. Even that tiny little thing, even if it's not directly like pointing towards an entity or anything, that will cause a leak. So make sure you don't have any holes or gaps in your map. I hope you found this tutorial useful. If you did, leave a thumbs up. If this tutorial didn't cover enough content for you and you want to make something cool but don't know how, have a look at my other video tutorials on mapping, because I may well have what you're looking for. And I really do recommend TWHL and sourcemodding.com as your first kind of resource if you want to learn how to do something new in Hammer, because they simply have literally hundreds of tutorials which you can follow along. I'll leave links in the description below. So, subscribe, stay tuned, leave the video a thumbs up if you liked it, and until next time, bye!